Well, there's also been a fierce political debate back home here in India about Britain's multiculturalism and whether there are lessons for India as well, and particularly Shashi Tharoor of the Congress party, who finds himself in the eye of yet another political storm. He joins us now on NDTV. Shashi Tharoor, thanks very much for being with us. Let me draw attention to that tweet that we're talking about that you had put out after Rishi Sunak's elevation, and you said that as we Indians celebrate the ascent of Rishi Sunak, let's honestly ask, can it happen here? We have to acknowledge that the Brits have done something very rare to place a member of a visible minority in the most powerful office. Now, the BJP has attacked you for this, and others have also pointed out that we've had Dr. Manmohan Singh, a Sikh, as Prime Minister for 10 years, that we have had Muslims as presidents. Therefore, was your comment misplaced?
Well, I would say, first of all, that, Dr. Manmohan Singh absolutely does belong to a visible minority, but most Hindus do not see Sikhs as particularly different from themselves. Can we still imagine the day in our increasingly majoritarian polity that the BJP is, of course, very much behind, when someone who is not Hindu, Sikh or Jain or Buddhist can head our national government? I mean, I'm being very blunt because, we know that Hindutva has a certain philosophy that says that the authentic Indians, the people who can lay claim to the term Hindu, are the people from Indic religions, people whose faith was born in the soil. So Hindu, Sikh, Jain, Buddhists are all seen in the same way. But they don't consider others welcome. They certainly, when Sonia Gandhi ji was offered the prime ministership by her victorious coalition, and I guess she would qualify as an immigrant, there were public fulminations about a foreigner ruling billion Indians, and one prominent politician, you know who she is, threatened to shave her head and conduct a dharna outside Parliament in protest. So Sonia Gandhi chose to decline. Now, that is the kind of situation that you haven't obviously got any parallels for in Britain. So I do believe that we have to acknowledge, and I've been a very strong critic of the British and British racism, but here they've chosen to anoint as their leader a brown-skinned Hindu, a member of a minority that represents just over 7% of their population, and what is more, after a history which was certainly associated with overt racism and a culture of racial discrimination that they exported with them to the colonies they ruled during centuries of imperial conquest and oppression. So given all of that, I would argue that what they've done is how they've outgrown. What's remarkable about the British is how they've outgrown their worst attributes. Whereas I'm sorry to say in India, I'm not sure we're ready to claim that yet.
Right.
So long ago, the British were running clubs where people of color were disallowed. I remember in my childhood in Bombay, there was still the Beach Candy Swimming Club where no Indians were allowed to step. It was a completely whites-only club.
Yeah.
The same with the Calcutta Swimming Club up to 1969.
So
These same Brits have a prime minister from an ethnicity that most British people in those days would have regarded and treated with contempt.
Shashi,
and so that, I think, is something we have to acknowledge. It's really special.
Are you therefore saying that there's a difference between India pre and post 2014?
Well, there is that too. I mean, we're sidetracking the conversation, Rishi. I'm talking about what we can learn from Rishi Sunak's triumph, as it were, because it really is a triumph. Race is one major factor, but it's not the only factor. Look at his overt faith in and practice of Hinduism. This is the faith that Churchill, you remember, notoriously sneered that Hindus are a beastly people with a beastly religion. And here he is, not only somebody who practices Hindu faith, does so openly, took his ministerial oath on a copy of the Bhagavad Gita. Even while campaigning for the leadership of the Tory party earlier this year, he tweeted photos and videos of himself performing cow worship and praying to Lord Krishna on Janmashtami. And this is remarkable. Can you imagine, say, an overt Christian or an overt Muslim who's public about their faith and practicing, being embraced by the BJP as a fit Prime Minister of India? I mean, I just don't think that the BJP is, I think they're being disingenuous. I don't think they're being honest when they claim that we've already got to where the British have got to, because on this one, I mean, there was a point made by somebody that the then Prime Minister, that is now the outgoing Prime Minister, read aloud from the Bible at the Queen's funeral service earlier this year. And they're asking, can a Hindu Prime Minister do that on a similar occasion? Now, my answer, I've not asked him, but I can imagine that like most Hindus, he would answer yes, because Hindus of the kind that's not the Hindutva kind have no difficulty venerating the beliefs and the sacred texts of other faiths. So Rishi Sunak's Hinduism is also something the British had to swallow. Third thing that the BJP will not talk about is the stark fact of his age. The guy's 42. His parliamentary career began in 2015, Nidhi. Can you imagine that, within 5 years, he's the finance minister, he's the chancellor of the exchequer. And within 7 years of his first ever election, he's the prime minister of the country. Now, in our country, and I don't just blame the BJP, all parties, he'd still be occupying the backbenches of any ruling party, sporting at best a minister of state tag, right? I mean, an MOS is how much a 42-year-old with 7 years in parliament can expect to get. So, I mean, look at the differences that this elevation is showing us. I'm glad we're celebrating it because I'm hoping it'll make us reflect a little bit on our own country and the things we take for granted here.
Right. Well, another interesting point that is made by some is that, Rishi Sunak was elected by MPs from his party and not the general public. And therefore, would the result have been different if he had actually been on the ballot?
Well, the fact is that we're going to find out. I think the good thing for Rishi is that he has now 2 or 3 years almost to actually demonstrate his performance and then go to the polls on the basis of a track record, which I think it's fair to say that if they were hiring a prime minister, if he had come in as a party leader challenging for position without the track record that he's already got and that he can still acquire, he may have had a problem. I wasn't totally surprised when between Liz Truss and him, even though he was manifestly the more qualified candidate, he lost. And he lost because the vote shifted from the MPs, where he was leading massively, to the general Tory membership, where he trailed. He trailed not that badly. I think it was 53 to 47, I think, in that election. No, 57 to 43. So it wasn't a great, it wasn't close, but it still was a defeat in the larger membership and not amongst the MPs. So we know that people who've seen him close at work respect his capacity. The British have had an economic meltdown under Truss. The last 45 days have been a disaster for the economy. They wanted a safe pair of hands. Here's a man who's worked in the private sector, worked on sort of Wall Street, worked in England in hedge funds. He knows the economy inside out. He's did pretty well in managing COVID from the financial point of view with his bailouts for businesses, 80% of salaries for those laid off, all those things. He came across as a safe pair of hands. And so it was clearly a question of either you go for this guy or you face a general election because you're not going to be able to find someone who can do as good a job of managing the economy. And that's, again, a wonderful thing that his merit and his ability trumped other considerations. When the British have to say, they basically accepted that here's somebody who can do the job. Let's not worry about his colors. Let's not worry about his religion. Let's not worry about his origin. He can do the job this country needs. I mean, that sort of thing, again, the sheer emphasis on merit is something that we could all benefit to learn from and applaud.
All right, Shashi Tharoor, thanks very much for joining us.